Marcus Reynolds stands frozen at his doorway, staring at the three men in police uniforms who just demanded to arrest his wife for trespassing in her own neighborhood. His $1 million home purchase in Oakwood Estates was supposed to be their dream come true. Now, as his wife Tanya appears behind him in her full county sheriff uniform, complete with badge and firearm, the fake officers' faces drain of color. One whispers into his radio, "We have a situation." Marcus knows this confrontation will change everything about their lives in this prestigious community. Before I dive into this unbelievable story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever faced discrimination or wondered what goes on behind those fancy neighborhood gates. Trust me, what happened next in our story will make you question everything you thought you knew about those perfect gated communities. Marcus Reynolds, a successful 42-year-old neurosurgeon, and his wife Tanya, the 38-year-old recently appointed first black female county sheriff, had spent years working toward their dream, home. The day they received the keys to their 5-bedroom colonial in Oakwood Estates, a community known for its manicured lawns, private golf course, and homes, starting at $1 million, felt like the culmination of their hard work and perseverance. Marcus remembered standing in their spacious foyer with Tanya and their 16-year-old son Jordan, breathing in the scent of new beginnings, certain they had finally made it. The exclusive gated community represented everything they had strived for: excellent schools for Jordan, a safe environment, proximity to both their workplaces and neighbors of similar professional standing. Yet from the moment the moving trucks arrived, subtle signs suggested not everyone welcomed their presence. Their next-door neighbor, who had warmly greeted the previous owners with homemade cookies according to the real estate agent, was conspicuously absent. At the mandatory new resident orientation, several homeowners avoided making eye contact, while others engaged in perfunctory conversation that felt rehearsed. Marcus initially dismissed these observations as paranoia or coincidence, focusing instead on settling into their new home and continuing his demanding work at the neurological center. Tanya, however, with her law enforcement background and finely tuned instincts, noticed the patterns immediately. The Homeowners Association, led by Richard Whitfield, a retired judge known for his traditional values, seemed particularly interested in their property. Within their first month, they received 3 notices for minor covenant violations that neighbors with similar issues didn't receive. Their landscaping, despite being maintained by the same company serving half the community, was deemed not up to Oakwood standards. Security vehicles slowed when passing their home, something Tanya noted they didn't do for other residences. When Tanya went jogging in the early mornings, security often stopped her to verify her residency, despite her wearing the community access wristband. Neighbors would cross to the other side of the street when they approached, offering tight smiles at best. Their cars, a luxury SUV and sports sedan, appropriate for the neighborhood standards, somehow received mysterious scratches in the community parking areas. The so-called random HOA inspections seemed to target only their property, with inspectors taking photos and making notes while barely glancing at nearby homes. Jordan faced his own challenges at the community pool, where teenagers made comments just loud enough for him to hear about scholarship residents, and security guards questioned his access despite his community ID. Marcus, determined to give his family the life they had earned, began documenting every incident methodically. As a surgeon, details mattered to him, and he approached these disturbing patterns with clinical precision. His spreadsheet grew weekly dates, times-specific comments, names when possible, and comparative observations of how other residents were treated. Tanya balanced her high-profile job, which already came with the pressure of being the county's first black female sheriff, with the mounting stress at home. Her position required political savvy and public confidence, making it complicated to address the discrimination they faced without potentially undermining her authority. She began noticing more concerning patterns. Unmarked vehicles that appeared to follow her at a distance when she left for work. HOA, board members who seemed to drive by their house at regular intervals, taking photos, and neighbors who suddenly went silent when the Reynolds family approached at community events. Despite these challenges, the family maintained their professional composure. Marcus continued his life-saving work at the hospital. Tanya excelled in her role as sheriff, implementing community policing initiatives that gained national attention, and Jordan maintained his honor roll status while excelling on the weed basketball team. The Reynolds were determined not to let the hostility drive them away from the home and community they had worked so hard to join. They had faced discrimination before, but never so organized and persistent. They had overcome obstacles throughout their careers and believed they could overcome this too. Little did they know that the subtle hostility was merely the surface of a much deeper and more dangerous conspiracy that would soon threaten everything they had built. 3 months after moving in, Marcus decided to host a family barbecue to celebrate Tanya's recent commendation for reducing county crime rates. Following HOA guidelines meticulously, he submitted the required gathering notification 2 weeks in advance, listing expected attendees and planned activities. The event would include 20 guests, mostly family members and close colleagues, all successful professionals in fields ranging from medicine to law. The day of the barbecue arrived with perfect weather, and Marcus had spent the morning preparing his famous smoked ribs and homemade sauce. Tanya decorated their expansive back patio with tasteful decorations, while Jordan set up the volleyball net on their lawn. As the first guests arrived, Marcus felt a sense of normalcy and pride in sharing their beautiful new home. 2 hours into the gathering, as conversations flowed and music played at a reasonable volume from their patio speakers, 2 community security vehicles pulled up in front of their home. 4 guards approached the backyard, bypassing the doorbell entirely. "We've received noise complaints from multiple neighbors," the lead guard announced loudly, interrupting a toast to Tanya's achievements. Marcus looked around in confusion. The music was barely audible from the street, and he could clearly hear the much louder gathering happening 3 houses down, where the Andersons, a white family, hosted weekly pool parties with no security interruptions. "That's impossible," Marcus replied calmly. "Our decibel level is well within community guidelines. I have a meter right here showing we're under the limit." The security guard ignored the evidence and demanded to see the event approval form, which Marcus promptly provided. After scanning it, the guard claimed, "This doesn't match what's happening here. You listed family gathering, but these people aren't all family." Marcus felt his temperature rising but maintained his professional demeanor. The form clearly states, "family and colleagues," which is exactly who's here. The confrontation escalated when the guards demanded identification from all guests, something Marcus had never observed happening at any other community gathering. "We need to verify. Everyone here is authorized," the guard insisted. Marcus's brother-in-law Charles, a prominent civil rights attorney, stepped forward and began recording the interaction. "Under what authority are you demanding identification from private citizens on private property?" he asked. "This is clearly discriminatory enforcement of community policies." The guards became visibly uncomfortable with the recording, but maintained their aggressive stance, until Charles mentioned potential legal action against both the security company and the HOA. They finally retreated, but not before the lead guard warned, "The HOA board will be hearing about this disturbance. There will be consequences for non-compliance with community standards." The incident cast a shadow over what should have been a joyful gathering. Though they attempted to continue the celebration, the mood had shifted, and guests began leaving earlier than planned, expressing concerns for the family's well-being in such an environment. The following morning, Marcus discovered all 4 of his car tires had been slashed with the word "Leave" scratched deeply into the driver's side door paint. When he called community security to report the vandalism, the responding guard surveyed the damage with suspicious indifference. "You might want to consider if this neighborhood is right for your family," he suggested with thinly veiled hostility. "Not everyone fits in at Oakwood." When Marcus insisted on filing a police report, the responding officer, a young white man who seemed uncomfortable in their expensive neighborhood, suggested it was probably just neighborhood kids, despite the security cameras that covered the 7 community parking areas. The officer made minimal notes and promised a follow-up that never came. The incident prompted Marcus to attend the monthly HOA meeting, where he calmly raised concerns about targeted harassment and selective enforcement of community guidelines. Richard Whitfield, The 70-something HOA president with silver hair and a permanent scowl listened with feigned patience before responding. "Dr. Reynolds," he said, emphasizing the title, in a way that somehow made it sound condescending. "Oakwood Estates has high standards that all residents must meet. Playing the race card when you're asked to comply with the same rules as everyone else is unproductive." Several neighbors nodded and murmured in agreement, while others looked uncomfortable but remained silent. Perhaps, Whitfield continued, your family might be more comfortable in a community with different standards. The implication hung in the air, as several residents actually applauded his comments. Tanya, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally stood. With the commanding presence that had helped her rise through law enforcement ranks, she addressed the room. "As a resident of this community and as the county sheriff, I'm formally notifying this board that I'm opening an investigation into potentially discriminatory practices within Oakwood Estates. Any attempts at intimidation or retaliation will be documented and addressed through appropriate legal channels." Her announcement created an immediate stir, with several board members huddling together in whispered conversation. As the meeting adjourned in a tense atmosphere, an older woman named Eleanor Patterson, who served as the HOA secretary, discreetly approached the Reynolds. "Be careful," she whispered, glancing around nervously. "Richard's influence extends beyond Oakwood. He has connections throughout the county, in law enforcement, the courts, real estate. You don't know what you're up against. They've done this before." Before they could ask for clarification, she hurried away, leaving the Reynolds with the disturbing realization that the discrimination they faced might be more organized and far-reaching than they had initially believed. As the county sheriff, Tanya Reynolds had access to resources and information that most discrimination victims lacked, but she was determined to conduct her investigation ethically and within the boundaries of her authority. She began by researching Oakwood Estates' demographics and history, making formal requests through proper channels, rather than using her position for personal gain. What she discovered disturbed her professional instincts. In the 30-year history of Oakwood Estates, not a single black family had remained in the community longer than 6 months. Property records showed that these families consistently sold their homes at significant losses, often 20 to 30% below market value, despite the community's steadily appreciating property values. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidental. Was this systematic harassment happening to every black family who dared to move into Oakwood Estates? Have you ever felt targeted in a place where you should have felt welcome, where your hard-earned success should have been enough to guarantee respect? Comment number 1, if you've experienced discrimination despite your achievements, or number 2, if you were shocked by what you just heard. While Tanya pursued official channels, Marcus took a different approach. He began a friendly relationship with their elderly neighbor Gerald Sullivan, a 78-year-old widower who initially seemed to welcome the Reynolds family. During their conversations over property line hedges or collecting mail, Gerald occasionally made comments that revealed deeply ingrained racist attitudes, though he seemed unaware of their offensive nature. "You speak so well," he told Marcus once, clearly intending it as a compliment. "And a brain surgeon? You're certainly not what I expected when they said a black family was moving in." Though these interactions were uncomfortable, Marcus recognized Gerald as a potential source of information. Through their conversations, Marcus learned about secretive community preservation meetings held regularly at Richard Whitfield's sprawling colonial home. "They're very concerned about maintaining Oakwood's character," Gerald explained innocently. "Richard says once the neighborhood changes, property values drop, and it's impossible to recover the community's prestige." When Marcus pressed for details about these meetings, Gerald became evasive, suddenly remembering gardening tasks that needed attention. Meanwhile, their son Jordan was fighting his own battle. After experiencing repeated hostile encounters at the community pool and basketball court, Jordan created an anonymous social media account to infiltrate the private group where Oakwood teenagers discussed community matters. What he discovered shocked even his parents. There was an organized effort called Operation Cleanup, specifically targeting the Reynolds family. Teens documented and shared the family's comings and goings, reporting to their parents any potential covenant violations. Screenshots revealed parents offering rewards like car privileges and allowance increases for information that could be used against the Reynolds. Got a video of the Reynolds kid bouncing his basketball after 9 p.m. One post read, "Dad says that's a noise violation, and he's reporting it tomorrow." The coordinated surveillance by teenagers under adult direction revealed the depth of the community's determination to drive them out. Have you ever discovered someone was monitoring your activities or spreading information about you behind your back? Drop a like if this kind of coordinated harassment makes your blood boil. As Tanya continued her official investigation, she began receiving anonymous threatening notes at her office. "Stop asking questions about Oakwood if you know what's good for your family," read. One note slipped between official documents. When she requested county records regarding Oakwood Estates, she discovered something that sent chills down her professional spine. The original property deeds contained racially restrictive covenants explicitly prohibiting sale to black married families. Though legally unenforceable since the 1960s, these restrictions had supposedly been removed from all documentation. However, Tanya found evidence suggesting the discriminatory language, while officially redacted, was still informally enforced through HOA practices and neighborhood character preservation efforts. The investigation took another turn when the Reynolds installed security cameras around their property, a decision that proved immediately valuable. Within days, they captured footage of HOA board members conducting nighttime inspections of their property, using flashlights to examine areas around their home at 2 a.m. When Marcus confronted them about this intrusion the next day, they claimed to be checking for covenant violations regarding exterior lighting and security features. Their explanation made no sense given the timing and furtive nature of their examination. Marcus filed formal complaints about these incidents, complete with video evidence, only to discover weeks later that these complaints had mysteriously disappeared from HOA records. "We have no record of these submissions," the community manager insisted, despite Marcus having receipt confirmations. The most troubling development came from Eleanor Patterson, the HOA board member who had warned them after the community meeting. She contacted Tanya through a secure channel at the sheriff's office rather than calling their home. "I've found documents you need to see," she said, her voice tense with fear. "There are financial records showing HOA funds being used for security consultants with concerning backgrounds. I've made copies, but I don't feel safe giving them to you directly." They arranged a discreet meeting at Tanya's office, but Eleanor never arrived. 3 days later, a moving truck appeared at her house, and by nightfall, she had left Oakwood Estates entirely. That evening, Tanya received a voicemail from an unknown number. "I couldn't stay. They found out I was talking to you. Check the community center safe behind the painting in the manager's office. The combination is 84736. I'm sorry I couldn't do more." The message ended abruptly, and attempts to call back went to an automated message saying the number was no longer in service. Has someone ever warned you about a dangerous situation and then disappeared, leaving you with more questions than answers? Comment number 1. If you think the Reynolds should continue their investigation despite the increasing danger, or number 2, if you think they should prioritize their safety and leave Oakwood Estates. What would you do if you discovered the community you fought to join was actually fighting to exclude people like you through potentially illegal means? As the Reynolds family weighed their options and the mounting evidence of discrimination, they had no idea how deep the conspiracy went or how dangerous their pursuit of truth would become. Armed with the combination from Eleanor's cryptic message, Marcus waited until the community center closed for the evening. As a resident, he had legitimate access to the building for gym use until 10 o'clock, but the administrative offices were strictly off-limits after business hours. Heart-pounding, he slipped into the manager's office, located the painting Eleanor had mentioned, a bland landscape that concealed a wall safe. The combination worked, revealing a thick folder labeled simply Community Preservation Protocols. Inside, he found what appeared to be the true history of Oakwood Estates. The land, he discovered with growing horror, had once been the Whitfield family plantation passed down through generations. Historical documents revealed that Richard Whitfield's grandfather had converted the agricultural land to residential development in the 1950s with explicit deed restrictions to maintain the property's heritage and character. Though such restrictions became legally unenforceable, the documents outlined a century-long family commitment to controlling who lived on their ancestral land through various legal and illegal means. Marcus photographed every page, with trembling hands, constantly alert for sounds indicating security might discover his presence. Meanwhile, Tanya's professional investigation was yielding equally disturbing results. An anonymous flash drive appeared on her desk, containing financial records connecting Richard Whitfield to several private security companies, staffed primarily by former police officers who had been dismissed from departments across 3 states for misconduct, ranging from excessive force to falsifying reports. Bank statements showed large HOA special assessments being funneled to these firms for unspecified community protection services. The connections painted a picture of a sophisticated network dedicated to maintaining Oakwood's racial exclusivity. The danger became personal when Jordan called his parents in panic one afternoon. "Someone's following me," he whispered into his phone while walking home from basketball practice. "A black SUV with tinted windows. They've been behind me since I left school." Marcus immediately left work and drove toward his son's location, calling Tanya simultaneously. When he reached Jordan, he found his son standing defiantly, facing a man who had exited the vehicle. Marcus pulled up beside them, heart racing. "What's going on here?" he demanded, positioning himself between the stranger and Jordan. The man, white and muscular with a military-style haircut, wore plain clothes but had the unmistakable bearing of law enforcement. Neighborhood Watch, the man claimed, though he wore no identification and refused to provide his name. "Just making sure everything's safe in Oakwood." By following a 16-year-old boy, Marcus questioned phone recording in his pocket. The confrontation escalated until neighbors began emerging from nearby homes drawn by the raised voices. Only then did the man retreat to his vehicle, but not before saying quietly, "You people should learn when you're not wanted." The incident left Jordan shaken and Marcus furious. Their home no longer felt like a dream, but a battleground. As the investigation deepened, Tanya discovered another disturbing layer to the conspiracy. Several Oakwood board members simultaneously served on the County Zoning Commission, where they had systematically blocked affordable housing developments for decades, ensuring economic barriers to integration remained firmly in place. She also uncovered evidence that property values in Oakwood were artificially inflated through manipulated appraisals, creating another barrier to diversity in the neighborhood. The appraisers responsible had financial ties to Whitfield's extensive business interests. Using the access code Eleanor had provided, Marcus returned to the community center after hours to search for additional evidence. In a hidden cabinet behind storage shelves, he discovered a trove of documents revealing a systematic practice of targeting minority homeowners with covenant violations. The files included photographs, notes on daily routines, and strategies for creating hostile living conditions until these families left. Each file ended with a property transfer document showing the home sold well below market value, often to shell companies that later transferred them to approved buyers at standard prices. The profit from these manipulated sales went into a community enhancement fund controlled exclusively by Whitfield and 2 other board members. Marcus photographed everything, his hands shaking with anger and fear. As he replaced the documents and prepared to leave, he heard voices approaching. He barely managed to slip out through a service entrance, certain that his discovery would have dire consequences if detected. At her office the next day, Tanya received an unexpected visit from County Commissioner Walter Bridges, an influential figure in local politics. After exchanging pleasantries and discussing general county business, Bridges casually shifted the conversation. "I understand you've been looking into Oakwood Estates," he said, examining his manicured fingernails. "Between us, Sheriff, you might want to focus on real crime instead of stirring up trouble with prominent citizens. Oakwood residents contribute significantly to county revenues and political campaigns. Richard Whitfield has many friends in high places." The thinly veiled threat hung in the air as Bridges smiled coldly. Just some friendly advice from someone who wants to see your promising career continue its upward trajectory. After he left, Tanya discovered through county records that Bridges and Whitfield were not only regular golfing partners, but shared ownership in several development companies that had benefited from zoning decisions over the past 20 years. The conspiracy was broader and reached higher than they had imagined, involving elected officials, law enforcement, and business interests throughout the county. That evening, as Marcus and Tanya shared their discoveries, they realized they were facing not just neighborhood discrimination, but a deeply entrenched system designed to preserve wealth and privilege through residential segregation. The question was no longer whether they were being targeted, but how extensive the network was, and how far their opponents would go to protect their exclusive community. "They've done this for generations," Tanya said, reviewing the historical documents. "We're just the latest family to challenge their control. But we might be the first with the resources and positions to fight back effectively," Marcus replied, determination, replacing his initial fear. "We have evidence, connections, and most importantly, the truth on our side." What they didn't yet realize was how dangerous that truth would become, as those implicated in the conspiracy recognized the threat the Reynolds family posed to their carefully constructed system of exclusion and privilege. The Reynolds family knew they needed a strategic response that would protect their safety while exposing the discriminatory practices at Oakwood Estates. They were dealing with powerful adversaries who had successfully driven out previous families. But Marcus and Tanya had advantages. Those families lacked professional status, legal knowledge, community connections, and most importantly, evidence of systematic discrimination. Marcus began by establishing a neighborhood diversity committee, sending invitations to all Oakwood residents. Despite clear intimidation, with Whitfield's allies photographing those who attended, 7 families joined the first meeting in the Reynolds living room. The small gathering included 2 Asian American families, a Latino couple, and 3 white families uncomfortable with the community's exclusionary practices. "We moved here for the schools and security," said Jennifer Chen, a cardiothoracic surgeon who worked with Marcus. "But the hostility toward anyone who doesn't fit their narrow definition of acceptable is unbearable. My children are asked if they speak English despite being 4th-generation Americans." Others shared similar experiences of subtle and overt discrimination, creating a record of testimonies that established a pattern beyond the Reynolds experience. Marcus also connected with service workers in the community, the landscapers, housekeepers, and maintenance staff, who witnessed discriminatory practices but feared losing their livelihoods by speaking out. Through respectful conversations and guarantees of anonymity, he documented troubling accounts security guards following black maintenance workers throughout their tasks. Housekeepers instructed to report on minority homeowners' activities. Landscapers told to provide lower quality service to certain homes, despite charging the same rates. These workers, invisible to most Oakwood residents, provided invaluable insights into the community's operations. Meanwhile, Tanya carefully built a coalition within law enforcement, identifying officers with integrity who could help monitor the situation. She discovered that several deputies had previously reported suspicious activities in Oakwood, including unauthorized security personnel using police-like equipment and vehicles, but were reassigned after pressure from above. These officers, frustrated by the corruption they'd encountered, became crucial allies. "I filed 3 reports about unauthorized security operations in Oakwood last year," Deputy Wilson confided. "Each one disappeared from the system within days. When I asked about it, the captain suggested I focus on real police work, instead of bothering prominent citizens over misunderstandings." Tanya established secure communication channels with these officers, creating a network that could respond if the situation escalated dangerously. Their son Jordan, initially traumatized by the harassment, channeled his fear into action by organizing a student advocacy group at his high school addressing housing discrimination. When the school administration attempted to shut down the group, claiming it was too political, local media covered the story. The resulting publicity brought unwanted scrutiny to Oakwood's practices and the school's complicity in silencing discussions about discrimination. The coverage featured Jordan speaking eloquently about his experiences, putting a human face on the abstract concept of housing discrimination. "I earned my place in advanced classes, and on the basketball team," he told reporters. "But in Oakwood, none of that matters because some people can't see past my skin color. That's not political, that's my daily reality." The publicity made it harder for Oakwood's leadership to operate in the shadows and created public pressure for accountability. In a particularly effective move, Marcus contacted previous black homeowners who had left Oakwood under suspicious circumstances. Initially hesitant, these families gradually opened up about their experiences, which mirrored the Reynolds' almost exactly escalating harassment, selective enforcement of rules, vandalism, and eventually pressure to sell at losses. One former resident, Dr. James Washington, revealed he had been directly paid $50,000 to leave quietly and had signed a non-disclosure agreement. Marcus convinced him that such agreements were unenforceable if they concealed discriminatory practices, and Dr. Washington agreed to provide a sworn statement about his experience. The Reynolds home security system, now significantly upgraded, captured damning footage of Richard Whitfield and security personnel approaching their property at night, tampering with their mail, and attempting to disable their security cameras. When Marcus confronted Whitfield with this evidence at the next HOA meeting, playing the footage for all attendees, Whitfield responded with threats rather than denials. "You're recording without consent," he blustered, face flushed with anger. "That's a violation of community guidelines and possibly state law. The board will be issuing significant fines for this violation." "Actually," Marcus responded calmly, "Oklahoma is a one-party consent state for recordings and security cameras on private property are explicitly permitted in the HOA Covenant Section 12, Paragraph 3. I've verified this with our attorney. Would you like to explain why you were tampering with our mail, which is a federal offense?" The confrontation ended with Whitfield storming out, but not before saying loudly enough for everyone to hear, "This isn't over, Reynolds." Not by a long shot. The most significant breakthrough came when Tanya discovered the HOA's private security firm employed individuals with criminal records who routinely impersonated law enforcement officers to intimidate undesirable residents. This practice violated numerous state and federal laws. Tanya began building a case for criminal charges, keeping her investigation compartmentalized to prevent leaks through the compromised channels she had identified. She used trusted deputies to gather evidence and document instances of impersonation, creating a case that could withstand legal challenges, even from well-connected defendants. As their countermeasures gained momentum, the Reynolds noticed a shift in community dynamics. Some neighbors who had previously avoided them began making tentative overtures of support, usually in private. Others who had been openly hostile became more subdued, perhaps sensing the changing tide. However, Richard Whitfield and his core supporters seemed to grow more desperate as their control eroded, suggesting the most dangerous confrontation was yet to come. The Reynolds understood they were challenging not just individual bigotry, but an entrenched system designed to preserve power and privilege. They knew from history that such systems don't surrender without a fight, and they prepared accordingly, securing their home, documenting everything, and building the strongest possible legal case. They were fighting not just for their right to live in Oakwood, but for every family that had been driven away and every family that might come after them. It was no longer just about their dream home, but about fundamental justice and the true meaning of community. The situation reached a breaking point on a Thursday afternoon when Jordan was walking home from basketball practice. Despite taking his usual route through Oakwood Estates, he was suddenly surrounded by 3 community security vehicles that screeched to a halt around him. 4 guards jumped out, assuming aggressive stances. "Don't move hands where we can see them," the lead guard shouted, hand hovering near his holstered weapon. Confused and terrified, Jordan complied immediately, raising his hands as pedestrians stopped to watch. "What's happening? What did I do?" he asked, voice trembling despite his attempt to remain calm. "We've had reports of someone matching your description breaking into vehicles," the guard responded, roughly turning Jordan around and pushing him against a security car. Despite Jordan showing his resident ID and community access card, the guards handcuffed him, ignoring his explanation that he was a resident walking home. Neighbors gathered watching the 16-year-old honor student being treated like a criminal in his own community. One neighbor called Marcus, who arrived minutes later to find his son handcuffed and surrounded by security personnel who became increasingly aggressive when Marcus began recording the interaction. "Stop recording, or we'll confiscate your phone for interfering with security operations," one guard threatened. "You have no authority to confiscate anything," Marcus responded, continuing to document the situation. "My son has identification proving he lives here. Remove those handcuffs immediately." The confrontation escalated until another resident, a white woman who had attended their diversity committee meeting, began recording as well. "I'm live streaming this to the community Facebook group," she announced loudly. "Everyone can see how Oakwood Security treats residents." Only then did the guards reluctantly release Jordan, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, but warning that security protocols must be followed regardless of resident status. The incident left Jordan shaken and Marcus furious. The psychological impact on their son was immediate and heartbreaking to witness. The confident, outgoing teenager became withdrawn, jumping at sudden noises, and reluctant to walk alone in the neighborhood. Have you ever witnessed someone being profiled or treated unfairly based on their appearance? Comment number 1, if you've experienced or witnessed racial profiling, or number 2, if you believe we need better oversight of private security companies. What would you do if you saw a teenager being handcuffed simply for walking in his own neighborhood? The following morning brought a new level of intimidation when the Reynolds received an official-looking eviction notice claiming mortgage fraud. The document, complete with court seals and legal terminology, stated they had 48 hours to vacate their property before forcible removal. Marcus immediately contacted their bank, which confirmed no issues with their mortgage, but admitted receiving inquiries about their loan status from someone claiming to represent the county assessor's office. The bank's fraud department flagged this as potential identity theft and advised the Reynolds to file a police report. The false eviction notice represented a significant escalation, moving from harassment to criminal impersonation of legal authorities. Tanya's commute to work became a tense journey as unmarked vehicles began following her. Using her law enforcement training, she varied her routes and times, documented license plates, and eventually conducted a traffic stop on one particularly persistent tail. The driver presented law enforcement credentials identifying him as Detective James Morrison from a neighboring county, claiming to be working undercover on a case involving the sheriff's department. When Tanya contacted the department, he supposedly represented they had no record of him or any such investigation. She arrested him for impersonating an officer, but upon arriving at the station to process him, discovered he had been released by a senior officer who claimed jurisdiction over the case. No record of the arrest remained in the system, and the officer responsible was conveniently unavailable for questioning. The incident confirmed Tanya's suspicions about corruption within law enforcement connected to the Oakwood conspiracy. Their home itself became a target when Marcus discovered their water had been tampered with, introducing potentially harmful contaminants, and electrical wiring had been modified in ways that created fire hazards. Professional inspectors confirmed these were deliberate acts of sabotage designed to appear as homeowner negligence, which would constitute violations of HOA covenants regarding property maintenance and safety. These modifications were made by someone with knowledge of residential systems, the electrician explained. They're subtle enough to pass initial inspection, but could cause catastrophic failures over time. The water contamination particularly disturbed them, as it suggested a willingness to risk actual physical harm to drive them away. One evening, Marcus received an urgent text from a sympathetic neighbor, informing him that an emergency HOA meeting had been called without notifying the Reynolds. They arrived to find the board voting on new security measures, specifically targeting homeowners who disrupt community harmony. The proposed measures included expanded authority for security to detain residents, conduct property inspections without notice, and restrict access to community facilities based on security risk assessments. The Reynolds' presence disrupted the proceedings, with Marcus formally objecting to decisions made without proper notification to all homeowners. The meeting devolved into heated exchanges, with several residents taking sides, either supporting or opposing the clearly discriminatory measures. After the contentious meeting ended without resolution, Richard Whitfield approached Marcus in the parking lot away from witnesses. The older man's typical veneer of civility had completely disappeared. "I'm going to make this simple for you, Reynolds," he said, voice low and threatening. "I'm prepared to offer $500,000 for your property. That's a loss for you, but it's the best offer you'll get under the circumstances." When Marcus refused immediately, Whitfield's expression darkened. "There are other ways to remove problems from Oakwood. Your wife's position won't protect you forever. Accidents happen even to people with badges. Documents get lost. Reputations get ruined. Children get hurt. Think about your son's future." The threat was unmistakable, and Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "Are you threatening my family?" he asked, recording the conversation discreetly. "I'm offering a solution," Whitfield replied. "This community has standards that long predate your arrival. My family built Oakwood to preserve certain values and traditions. We've maintained those standards for generations, and will continue to do so by whatever means necessary. You can leave voluntarily with some compensation, or you can leave eventually with nothing, possibly less than nothing. The choice is yours." The direct threat confirmed everything they had suspected about the organized nature of the discrimination they faced. It was not random bigotry, but a systematic effort to maintain racial exclusivity led by a man whose family had been enforcing such exclusion for generations. The Reynolds now understood they weren't just fighting for their home, but potentially for their safety and lives. Have you ever been directly threatened for standing up against injustice? Would you stand your ground against powerful forces to fight discrimination, even when faced with escalating threats? The Reynolds family stood at a crossroads, knowing their next decisions could have life-altering consequences. The conspiracy had shown its true face, and the danger was no longer subtle or deniable. What they didn't yet know was that their careful documentation and strategic countermeasures had created the foundation for exposing the entire operation if they could survive the coming confrontation. The Reynolds received unexpected information from an unlikely source when Darren Miller, a young security guard at Oakwood, requested a private meeting with Tanya at her office. Visibly nervous, the 24-year-old revealed he had joined Oakwood Security after military service, needing the job but increasingly uncomfortable with the operation's true nature. "They have a plan to force you out," he explained, hands trembling as he placed a USB drive on her desk. "Whitfield has hired ex-cops with questionable backgrounds to impersonate actual law enforcement. They've created fake arrest warrants for you, claiming you abused your authority and tampered with evidence in an ongoing investigation." The plan, according to Miller, was to publicly arrest Tanya on false charges, damaging her reputation and professional standing regardless of whether the charges were eventually dismissed. "They've obtained authentic-looking uniforms, badges, and even modified police vehicles," Miller continued. "Most concerning, they've acquired police-band radios to monitor real police activity and avoid interference. They're planning to execute this soon, within days." When Tanya asked why he was taking the risk to warn them, Miller's expression darkened. "My younger brother was beaten by police during a traffic stop last year. No reason just because he was black and driving in the wrong neighborhood. Watching Whitfield plan something similar against your family, using fake cops to intimidate and harm black citizens. I couldn't be part of it. Some lines shouldn't be crossed." Miller's information aligned with evidence they had already gathered and provided crucial details about timing and methods. The Reynolds immediately implemented a careful strategy while appearing to lower their guard to lure the conspirators into action. They enhanced their security and preparation. They strategically shared false information about Tanya's work schedule through channels they suspected were being monitored. They installed additional hidden cameras around their property beyond the visible security system. Tanya coordinated with trusted colleagues in law enforcement, positioning them to respond when the impersonators made their move. Marcus arranged for their son to stay with relatives, prioritizing his safety, though Jordan initially resisted, wanting to stand with his parents. "This isn't surrendering," Tanya explained to him. "This is strategic positioning. Sometimes you have to let your opponent think they're winning to expose their true intentions." Before Jordan left, he narrowly escaped an attempt to plant drugs in his school backpack when a classmate overheard two students discussing the plan and warned him. The incident was captured on school cameras, identifying the perpetrator as the son of HOA board member Frederick Wilson. When confronted by school administration, the student claimed it was just a prank, and officials appeared ready to accept this explanation until Tanya arrived in her official capacity, making it clear that planting illegal substances constituted a serious criminal offense. The school's attempt to cover up the incident revealed another institutional connection to the Oakwood conspiracy, with the principal having close ties to Whitfield through church and business associations. The escalation against their son confirmed the family had made the right decision to move him temporarily to safety. The conspiracy's reach became even clearer when Marcus received a threatening call from an untraceable number. "You have 48 hours to accept Whitfield's offer and sign the property transfer," the distorted voice stated. "After that deadline, your wife's career and your son's future will be destroyed. We have evidence of misconduct that will end her time as sheriff and ensure criminal charges. Your son's college prospects will vanish when drugs are found in his possession. This is your final warning." Marcus recorded the call, and working with a technical expert from Tanya's department, traced it to a burner phone purchased with an HOA credit card directly linking the threat to Oakwood's leadership. Through their investigation, the Reynolds learned they weren't alone in their experience. Several other minority families in neighboring upscale communities reported similar patterns of harassment and intimidation. The Reynolds organized these families into a coalition, sharing resources, evidence, and creating a support network that made each family stronger than they would have been in isolation. The shared experiences created a compelling pattern of discrimination that would be difficult to dismiss as coincidence or misunderstanding. Tanya's professional investigation uncovered perhaps the most disturbing element of the conspiracy. Whitfield's security firm had obtained police equipment illegally, including authentic-looking uniforms, badges, and vehicles, modified to resemble unmarked police cars. The operation had connections to a corrupt equipment manager in the state police supply chain who diverted materials for substantial payments. This illegal acquisition of law enforcement equipment constituted serious federal offenses beyond the civil rights violations they had already documented. With this knowledge, Tanya quietly prepared a multi-agency operation involving trusted officers from her department, FBI Civil Rights Division representatives, and State Police Internal Affairs. The plan was to catch the impersonators in the act, documenting their criminal behavior and tracing it back to Whitfield and his co-conspirators. By allowing the plot to unfold under controlled conditions, they would expose not just the immediate perpetrators, but the entire network behind them. As they finalized their preparations, the Reynolds understood they were approaching the most dangerous phase of their ordeal. The conspiracy had shown its willingness to use increasingly aggressive tactics, and now they were deliberately drawing their opponents into a confrontation. Though carefully planned, any such operation carried risks. "Are we doing the right thing?" Marcus asked Tanya the night before their trap was set to spring. "We could still take Whitfield's money and move somewhere safer." Tanya took his hand, her expression resolute. "This stopped being just about our home months ago. If we leave, they'll continue doing this to other families. The next family might not have our resources or positions to fight back. This is bigger than us now." Marcus nodded, knowing she was right. They were fighting not just for themselves, but for justice that extended far beyond their personal situation. They had uncovered a system of discrimination that had operated successfully for generations by intimidating victims into silence and isolation. By standing their ground, they had the opportunity to expose and dismantle that system. As they completed their preparations, both felt the weight of the moment, but also a sense of purpose that transcended their individual circumstances. They were living at a point where their personal struggle intersected with a larger historical fight for equality and justice. Whatever happened next would have implications far beyond their family, or even Oakwood Estates. The rain fell in sheets across Oakwood Estates on Thursday evening, creating an atmospheric backdrop to the confrontation the Reynolds had anticipated for days. Marcus was reviewing patient files in his home office while keeping a discreet eye on the security camera feeds displayed on a secondary monitor. Their carefully leaked false information had indicated Tanya would be working late, leaving Marcus alone at home until after midnight. In reality, Tanya was positioned nearby with trusted deputies, waiting for the impersonators to make their move. At precisely 8:47 in the evening, 3 unmarked vehicles with tinted windows pulled up to the Reynolds home, parking in a formation that blocked the driveway. 6 men emerged, 3 wearing what appeared to be police uniforms, while the others wore plain clothes, with visible badges and tactical gear. Marcus activated the silent alert system they had installed, sending simultaneous notifications to Tanya's team and starting the enhanced recording on all security cameras. He took a deep breath, mentally reviewing the strategy they had developed, then went to answer the increasingly aggressive knocking at his front door. Opening the door partially with the security chain engaged, Marcus found himself facing 3 men in convincing police uniforms, though he immediately noted subtle inconsistencies that wouldn't be apparent to most civilians. Dr. Marcus Reynolds, the lead impersonator, asked with practiced authority, "We have a warrant for the arrest of Sheriff Tanya Reynolds on charges of abuse of authority and tampering with evidence in an ongoing investigation." "Is she home?" Marcus maintained his composure despite the surge of anger he felt. "May I see the warrant, please?" he asked calmly. The man held up a document that from a distance appeared official, but he quickly pulled it back when Marcus reached for it. "This is just notification. The full documentation will be provided at processing. We need to know if Sheriff Reynolds is on the premises." "I don't believe you have proper jurisdiction here," Marcus responded, stalling as he had been instructed by Tanya's legal team. "My wife is the county sheriff, so any action against her would require special protocols and oversight from the State Bureau of Investigation. May I see your identification and badge numbers?" The question clearly irritated the impersonators, who exchanged glances before the leader became more aggressive. "Sir, we don't have time for this. Either you tell us where she is, or we'll add obstruction and accessory charges. Is she inside the house? I need to see proper identification and the complete warrant before I answer any questions." Marcus insisted, continuing to record the interaction. "That's my legal right." The confrontation escalated as the men became increasingly frustrated with Marcus's calm insistence on proper procedure. The leader attempted to push the door open, but the security chain held. "We can force entry, if necessary," he threatened. "This is an authorized law enforcement action. Without showing proper identification or a complete warrant, any forced entry would constitute breaking and entering," Marcus countered. "I'm a law-abiding citizen asking for standard documentation before allowing strangers into my home." The standoff continued for several minutes, with the impersonators growing visibly agitated as Marcus calmly refused their increasingly hostile demands. The situation took a dangerous turn when one of the men drew his weapon, creating a potentially deadly confrontation. "Last chance," the armed man stated. "Open this door now, or we're coming in and adding resisting arrest to the charges." Throughout the escalating situation, Marcus remained outwardly composed, while strategically positioning himself to protect Jordan, who had insisted on returning home for this confrontation, despite his parents' concerns. The teenager was hidden upstairs, recording everything from a different angle, as they had planned. The impersonators' growing aggression actually strengthened the case they were building, providing clear evidence of their tactics and intentions. Just as the situation reached its breaking point, with one man preparing to break down the door, the confrontation took a dramatic turn. Tanya, who had entered the house through the back door after being alerted by their security system, emerged from behind Marcus in her full sheriff's uniform badge, prominently displayed, an official weapon holstered but visible. The effect on the impersonators was immediate and profound. Their faces drained of color, and the man with the drawn weapon quickly lowered it. "Gentlemen, Tanya," said her voice, carrying the full authority of her office. "I'm Sheriff Tanya Reynolds. I need to see your identification badge numbers and the warrant you claim to have right now." The lead impersonator's hand moved toward his pocket in what could have been an attempt to reach for a weapon. "I wouldn't," Tanya warned, her tone leaving no doubt about her seriousness. There are currently 12 legitimate law enforcement officers surrounding this property with weapons trained on this doorway. Make very careful choices about your next move." As if to confirm her statement, police lights suddenly activated on multiple vehicles that had silently positioned themselves around the property, bathing the scene in red and blue. Legitimate deputies emerged with weapons ready, creating a perimeter around the impersonator's vehicles. The fake officers froze, clearly unprepared for this level of response. Their plan had relied on the element of surprise and intimidation of civilians, not a confrontation with actual law enforcement prepared for their arrival. "On the ground, hands behind your heads now," Tanya commanded, and the training behind her voice produced an almost automatic compliance from most of the men. 2 attempted to flee, but were quickly apprehended by waiting deputies. As the impersonators were secured and real officers moved in to make arrests, Richard Whitfield's luxury sedan pulled up to the scene. He emerged clearly alarmed by the police presence at what should have been a simple intimidation operation from his perspective. "What's happening here?" he demanded, approaching the house, but stopping abruptly when he recognized Tanya in uniform, overseeing the arrests. "This is a misunderstanding. My security team was simply responding to concerns about unauthorized individuals in the neighborhood." Tanya turned to face him, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes conveying the full weight of justice finally being served. "Mr. Whitfield, these men were impersonating police officers and attempting to execute a fraudulent arrest using counterfeit documentation. Those are federal offenses with substantial penalties." Whitfield's composure cracked momentarily before he attempted to recover. "I have no connection to these individuals or their actions. If they've broken any laws, that's their responsibility." "Interesting claim," Tanya replied, "considering they were driving vehicles registered to your personal LLC and carrying identification connecting them to your security firm. We'll be executing search warrants on your residence, business, and the HOA offices within the hour." As Whitfield began to protest, one of the detained impersonators called out, "This is bull. Whitfield hired us directly. He provided the uniforms, the paperwork, everything. I'm not going down alone for this." The man, facing serious charges and seeing Whitfield attempting to distance himself, made a quick calculation about his best interests. "I want a deal. I've got recordings of meetings where he laid out the whole plan to get rid of the Reynolds family. I'm not taking the fall while he walks away." Whitfield's face contorted with rage as he lunged toward the cooperating impersonator, only to be restrained by deputies. As he was escorted to a patrol car, he directed his fury toward the Reynolds family. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You have no idea who you're dealing with or what powers you're challenging. My family built this community, and we decide who belongs here." His mask of respectability, completely discarded Whitfield's true nature, was fully displayed for all to see, including the gathering crowd of Oakwood residents who had emerged from their homes to witness the commotion. The spectacle of their HOA president being placed in a police car while spewing racist threats provided the final undeniable confirmation of everything the Reynolds had claimed about the discrimination they faced. As the impersonators and Whitfield were taken away, Tanya turned to the assembled neighbors, many of whom looked shocked by what they had witnessed. "This community belongs to all its residents," she stated clearly. "Equal protection under the law isn't optional, and no one is above that law regardless of their position or history. What you've witnessed tonight is the end of a conspiracy that has victimized families for generations." The confrontation had exposed not just the immediate plot against the Reynolds family, but laid bare the systematic discrimination that had shaped Oakwood Estates since its inception. As the rain continued to fall, washing away the carefully maintained facade of exclusivity and tradition, the Reynolds stood together on their doorstep, battered but unbowed by months of escalating harassment. They had not only protected their right to live in the community they had chosen, but had struck a significant blow against the forces that had denied that right to countless families before them. The conspiracy was exposed, its architects facing justice, but the Reynolds knew that transforming Oakwood into a truly inclusive community would require more than one night's victory. The real work of healing and change was just beginning. The arrests at the Reynolds home that rainy evening marked the beginning, not the end, of a transformation that would extend far beyond Oakwood Estates. In the days that followed, the investigation expanded dramatically as evidence seized from Whitfield's home. The HOA offices and the security company headquarters revealed a network of corruption more extensive than even the Reynolds had imagined. Multiple arrests followed as authorities uncovered connections between Whitfield's discriminatory housing scheme and various county officials, real estate developers, property appraisers, and even judges who had systematically maintained racial exclusivity across multiple communities for decades. The case quickly drew national attention, with media outlets camping outside Oakwood's gates and requesting interviews with the Reynolds family. They selectively engaged with journalists who focused on the systemic issues rather than sensationalizing their personal ordeal, using the platform to highlight housing discrimination as a continuing problem nationwide. "This isn't just about one family or one neighborhood," Marcus explained during a television interview. "This is about the fundamental right to live where you choose, without facing discrimination, harassment, or danger because of your race." Richard Whitfield and several HOA board members ultimately faced federal charges for civil rights violations, conspiracy racketeering, and fraud. The evidence meticulously gathered by the Reynolds proved devastating in court, particularly the documentation showing decades of targeted harassment against minority homeowners. Most damning were the financial records revealing how properties had been systematically devalued when owned by minorities, then resold at market rates to white buyers, with the profits flowing through shell companies back to Whitfield and his associates. What had begun as the Reynolds' fight for their home expanded into one of the largest housing discrimination cases in recent history. Their evidence led to investigations of similar practices in exclusive communities across 3 states, resulting in numerous additional prosecutions and civil settlements. The county commission, with several members themselves implicated in the conspiracy, held emergency sessions to address the systemic discrimination exposed by the case. New regulations were implemented, requiring transparent HOA practices, prohibiting discriminatory security measures, and establishing community oversight boards with diverse membership to ensure equitable enforcement of rules. Financial audits of all county HOAs were mandated, revealing similar, though less extensive, discriminatory practices in several other communities. Despite numerous offers to purchase their home at generous prices, including from a developer who suggested they might want a fresh start away from painful memories, the Reynolds chose to remain in Oakwood. Leaving would send exactly the wrong message, Tanya explained to friends who questioned their decision. "We've earned our place here, and our presence matters not just for us, but for everyone who comes after us." Their decision to stay became a powerful statement about belonging and resistance, transforming what had been a traumatic experience into a platform for meaningful change. The community dynamics shifted dramatically in the aftermath of the arrests. Many residents who had silently witnessed the discrimination approached the Reynolds with apologies and offers of support. Some claimed they hadn't fully understood what was happening, while others admitted they had feared becoming targets themselves if they spoke out. While Marcus and Tanya accepted these overtures with grace, they also gently challenged their neighbors to examine how silence enables discrimination to flourish. "Understanding isn't enough," Marcus told the newly formed Community Relations Committee. "Active anti-racism requires courage and consistent action, not just good intentions." Their son Jordan, whose experiences had been particularly painful, found purpose in establishing a youth advocacy program that became a model for schools throughout the region. What began as a small group of students discussing housing discrimination expanded into a comprehensive program addressing various forms of institutional racism, providing young people with tools to recognize and combat discrimination in their communities. Jordan's transformation, from victim to leader, became an inspiring story in itself, featured in educational journals and youth empowerment conferences. "When they handcuffed me in my own neighborhood for simply walking home," Jordan told a group of students, "I could have let that moment define me through fear. Instead, I chose to let it define me through action. That's a choice we all have when facing injustice." After a contentious special election, Marcus became chairman of the new diverse HOA board, implementing policies that gradually transformed Oakwood from an exclusive enclave into a genuinely welcoming community. Under his leadership, the HOA established scholarships for local students, community education programs, and inclusive social events that brought neighbors together across racial and economic lines. Most significantly, they removed architectural and financial barriers that had implicitly maintained exclusivity while still preserving the community's beauty and safety. Contrary to the fears Whitfield had exploited, property values actually increased as Oakwood's reputation evolved from exclusivity to excellence in diversity and community engagement. Tanya's professional standing grew as she navigated the complex case while maintaining her duties as sheriff. She received a prestigious Civil Rights Award, but found greater satisfaction in using the experience to implement new training protocols for her department. Law enforcement can either reinforce or help dismantle systems of inequality, she explained at a police academy graduation ceremony. That choice happens not just in moments of crisis, but in daily interactions and institutional practices. Choose wisely because history will judge those choices. On the first anniversary of the confrontation that exposed the conspiracy, the Reynolds hosted a community celebration on their front lawn. Neighbors of all backgrounds attended, from original residents to families who had recently moved into homes once kept out of their reach by discriminatory practices. As children played together and adults engaged in genuine conversation, Marcus and Tanya shared a quiet moment, watching the community they had fought for and helped transform. "Sometimes I still can't believe we stayed," Tanya admitted, watching Jordan laughing with friends near the barbecue. "There were so many moments when leaving seemed like the only safe choice." "Yet here we are," Marcus replied, squeezing her hand. "And more importantly, here they are." He gestured toward two black families who had recently moved into Oakwood, their children already integrated into the neighborhood playgroups. "They won't have to fight the battle we fought. That makes everything we endured worthwhile." The Reynolds' stand against discrimination had created ripples of change throughout the region and beyond. Lawyers used their case as precedent in fighting housing discrimination nationwide. Legislators cited their experience when drafting stronger, fair housing protections. Community organizers studied their strategies for documenting and exposing systematic discrimination. What had begun as their personal trauma had transformed into a legacy of justice that would benefit countless families for generations to come. As the community celebration continued into the evening, with neighbors who had once been suspicious of each other now sharing food and conversation on the Reynolds lawn, the transformation was visible and profound. Oakwood Estates had been built on a foundation of exclusion and privilege, its very design intended to keep certain people out. Now, through the courage of one family who refused to be driven away, it was slowly becoming what all communities should be. A place where diversity is valued, belonging is universal, and justice is not merely an ideal, but a lived reality. Have you ever witnessed a community transform from exclusivity to genuine inclusion? How might your own neighborhood or community benefit from confronting hidden biases? If you found this story of standing against discrimination inspiring, please hit like and subscribe to support more content that highlights the ongoing fight for housing equality. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that systemic racism isn't just historical, but continues today in subtle and not so subtle ways. Drop a comment about your own experiences with housing discrimination or community transformation, and let me know what other stories of resistance and justice you'd like to hear. Thank you for listening to our journey. And remember, justice requires both courage and persistence, and change begins when someone refuses to accept things as they are and envisions what they could be. The Reynolds family's struggle against housing discrimination reveals powerful truths about justice and community. First, systemic racism often hides behind respectability and community standards, making it harder to identify, but no less harmful. Second, documentation is crucial. Marcus's meticulous record-keeping provided the evidence needed to expose the conspiracy. Third, building coalitions creates strength. The Reynolds succeeded by connecting with allies inside and outside Oakwood, showing that solidarity overcomes isolation. Fourth, institutions often protect discriminatory practices until forced to change through persistent pressure and legal action. Fifth, taking a stand requires courage but creates ripple effects far beyond one family or community. The Reynolds' refusal to leave transformed policies across multiple communities. Perhaps most importantly, true community isn't built on exclusion, but on genuine inclusion, where all residents are valued equally. Meaningful change requires both exposing injustice and reimagining what communities can become. The Reynolds family shows us that confronting discrimination isn't just about fighting against something negative, but fighting for something positive. Neighborhoods, where diversity strengthens rather than threatens where belonging isn't determined by race, and where justice isn't just an ideal, but a lived reality for all residents. Have you ever witnessed discrimination hidden behind rules or standards in your community? Or perhaps you've been the one to stand up against unfair treatment when others stayed silent. Your experiences matter in this ongoing Missa.com conversation about housing equality. Drop a comment sharing your story or thoughts on how we can create truly inclusive communities. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others find it too. Subscribe for more powerful, true stories about people fighting against injustice and creating positive change. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that systemic racism isn't just historical but continues today in ways both obvious and subtle. Thank you for joining me in shedding light on these important issues. Remember, transformation begins when we refuse to accept things as they are and work together to create the just communities we all deserve.